everyone, and welcome to the Imagining a New We video blog with me, Dr. Samantha Cutrara, a video series designed to help history teachers and other history educators teach history in ways that are more transformative, meaningful, and inclusive for their students. Today we are continuing the series that I'm doing, talking with different people in the industry, history teachers, history educators, museum professionals, historians, about what it might mean to teach in these pandemic times, and hopefully these post-pandemic times. Today we have a real treat, although I feel like I say that every time. We're talking with Andrea Eidinger. She's a historian and just like a Renaissance woman. Like, she does so many things. She had a blog called Unwritten Histories that was so foundational for so many in the Canadian history, not education community, the Canadian historian community. She's also done work for Canada's History, the CBC. She is the consulting historian on the Secret Life of Canada podcast, which is a great podcast. You should check it out. She has so many perspectives that I know are going to be really valuable for this conversation. So let's go over to Zoom and say hi to Andrea. Hi, Andrea. Andrea, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's such a pleasure to be able to talk with someone with so much different experience in this field, like someone like yourself. And so I'm really excited to hear your perspectives on like teaching in these pandemic times. So hi, thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I've been asking everyone 3 questions. One is about like if your current thoughts have changed. The other one is about how you might think, if at all, will like change teaching after this, history teaching. And then the third one is about imagining a new we, and things about like imagination and this notion of like we, if that's going to change at all. So let's just get right into it, shall we?
Sure,
So,
awesome.
I have been saying that my perspective of history has changed a lot, because I guess it has it has confirmed the things I think about history. Like, we need to think about emotion. We need to think about connection. Has this moment, this pandemic moment, changed thinking of history for you at all? And like, no pressure if it doesn't. Mary Chaxiris was saying like, I'm just too busy to teach to think about that. But have you thought about teaching history or history itself differently in these days?
I think that there are a lot of potential avenues that we could take teaching in terms of changes that are arising from the pandemic situation. I think that there's probably going to be a lot of changes in terms of what's offered online. I think there's definitely room for an interesting discussion about how we are all adapting to these particular situations. But I find that my particular approach hasn't really changed, just because I've already spent a really long time trying to figure out how to teach in a way that made me personally feel comfortable. And it's designed in a way that kind of works with what's going on in the world as it stands right now. So I am technically trained as a social historian, and that's what I love the most. And as a social historian, I have always, and this is a terrible admission, but I hate political history. And whenever I was...
It's a valid admission. I don't love it myself.
In terms of political history, it's the formal politics, like the policy, legislation, all that kind of stuff that's not as interesting, as opposed to power dynamics. But what I like to do is focus very much on the kind of history that I would have liked. So when I took the survey classes as an undergrad and in high school, I slept through them. I thought that they were really boring because they were essentially the history of dead white men, which I now facetiously call dead white dudes. And I didn't find that I was able to connect with it on an emotional level or basically any kind of interest at all. But as I got higher in terms of my education, education, I was able to do more of the kind of history that interested me, which was the history of ordinary people. So when I became a professor, most of us start out teaching the surveys, and that's what I've taught the most. I went into it with the intention of creating the Canadian History Survey in a way that I would have liked it to look. So rather than doing it in a very traditional style, I was going to do it in a style that I found interesting and that meshed well with my training. So I focus very much on the social history of people and this idea that all people's stories have equal value and that we need to understand many different aspects of the past as opposed to just focusing on this one straight narrative that we're always encountering. So, I've talked about pandemics in previous classes because I think that we do a disservice if we talk about World War I and we don't really talk about the Spanish flu pandemic. So that has sort of this focus on social history, this focus on the experiences of individuals, this idea that people in the past are a lot like people today. They have hopes, dreams, fears, has stuck with me, and I think is very appropriate for this particular time that we're going through, because I see a lot on social media and on the media that, we're all in this together, and there are a lot of stories about sort of individuals, and those are the things that I find the most compelling. So my perspective hasn't really changed so much as it's just confirmed that I'm comfortable doing the kind of history that I'm doing, and I think that it's appropriate to equip my students with the tools that they need to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I love that. I think that this notion of a social history as a way for us to really think through this moment allows us to kind of be grounded in this moment, because we all are social actors, and we can think about the social and the cultural part of right now, because the political part is all like that. I think is the thing that we learn in hindsight more when we see like this cohesive political plan, or just like what became something like a cohesive political plan. But I think that like really demonstrating or appreciating a commitment to social history helps us think through this. Do you think that this will shift our teaching of history after this? Do you think maybe more people will be bringing up social history, or do you think that this will shift teaching after this, history teaching?
I hope it does. I don't know if it will, but I hope that it is sort of a wake-up call about the extent to which inequalities in our society are embedded in the very fabric of everyday life, and can be, the difference between life and death for a lot of people. And I think that those kinds of dynamics, those kinds of experiences are central to history. So I would like to see that happen. I don't know, because Canadian history, history in general, is a field that I think evolves very slowly. And I don't know if we'll really see any significant changes for quite some time. I do hope that one of the things that we really do focus on is having a much more compassionate and kind approach to teaching. There's been a lot of discussion about how we need to, account for the fact that students are going through a lot right now. They're dealing with people, family members being sick, friends being sick, maybe they're sick, having to deal with having lost jobs. So the goal for many professors right now is to focus on providing students with the support that they need to get through the rest of the semester, but in a way that is kind and understanding of how students are really struggling. And I hope that emphasis on kindness and compassion is something that follows through. Something that I decided to do last year, which has worked really well, is actually getting rid of due dates completely. And no, that has not resulted in me getting a whole wave of stuff at the end of the semester. But I recognize that students have a lot on their plates, even under normal circumstances, and that school might not necessarily be their top priority, and that they have to shuffle home responsibilities, work responsibilities along with school. So I try to be as flexible as possible and accommodate that. So I provide them with suggested due dates, but this way I don't have to, or I give students the ability to feel free to submit later if they feel that they would produce a better paper, as opposed to sitting and worrying about sort of arbitrary dates. Because like I said, life is complicated. School is not, the be all and end all as much as we might like it to be. And I think that the end result is that students learn a lot more when they're given that kind of space to just be and that kind of accommodation. So I would like to see maybe not everybody get rid of due dates. I know that's not what everybody would love to do, but just to be kinder.
I think that's really interesting, and I know that you're talking from the perspective of somebody that, like a history professor, right? That's somebody that's teaching in an undergrad setting. And I'm thinking about K-12 teachers and how much in like their Bachelor of Education, for example, they're introduced to so many different types of assessment methods. And I know a lot of them are introduced to like having students make a choice about the type of assessments that they do. And I think that like to bring some of the things that you were saying to a K-12 audience, I think that like this is a good opportunity, well, for professors as well, to explore different assessments and to be able to explore with their students and like to just be honest, like we're all trying to figure this out and like what does this mean? Because we all know that when something ends, it never really ends. And so we're going to be dealing with this afterwards. So this idea about kindness and compassion and also inequity, which I think, those things work so importantly together, right? To have kindness and compassion for the fact that people don't have experiences like you and that you might not even recognize them. I think is really interesting. So thank you for bringing that in.
I think that when it comes to, the reality is that 5 years from now, none of my students are going to know my name. They're not going to remember what course that they took. But if they can come out of the courses that I give them with the ability to think critically and compassionately and to have that sort of flexibility, then I'm happy with that. And that's not so much about, meeting particular targets and deliverables and due dates, so much as just the learning experience. And I think that that's something that's really gotten lost over the past few years. It's less of a focus on just learning and growing and seeing education at all levels as an opportunity to do that. And there's been less of a focus on that and more of a focus on sort of standardized testing and getting good grades. Like my students are so anxious about the grades that they get. And I keep telling them, like, yes, they're important, but when you're finished school, no one's going to care if you got an A or a C. They just want to know that you went through the experience and you have the skills that you need or that you would get from completing an undergraduate education. So I would like to see, or it would be great if more people would be focusing on that and less in terms of, like, can my student, properly format a footnote, which of course I hope that they can. But.
Well, I love this notion about thinking about history critically and compassionately, because to me that really brings up like the emotion and the affect of both the past but also the present. And to learn meaningfully about the past, to learn the history meaningfully involves compassion, involves that emotion, as well as this notion of critically exploring how and what we remember. So thank you for that. Yeah, I really like that, compassionately and critically. Speaking of like compassion and criticalness, although that word never translates over that well, but like
criticality.
Yeah, I can't even say it, but that's cool. So my work is about imagining a new we and ensuring that, like, when we think about Canada, we are having these increasing circles of inclusion of what it means to be Canadian, what a Canadian experience is, what it means to teach and learn history. And I've been really interested in people's responses to about whether or not that this will change whether this will change how we imagine. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I have hopes. So the way that you're sort of talking about how you teach in terms of questioning this idea about what it means to be Canadian, I mean, that's something that I really do as well. In fact, the first lecture of every Canadian history course I give is what does it mean to be Canadian, and who counts, and how the histories that we tell ourselves that we learn in school are very much an important part of shaping what it means to be Canadian. And for a really long time, that story was very much focused on the history of white men almost exclusively. And it created this perception, or was paired with this perception, that a Canadian person is a white person and everybody else is kind of something else, is Canadian and something else. And, you know, personally speaking as myself, I'm Jewish, and a Jewish girl growing up in Montreal, I didn't really see myself, my history reflected in what I learned in school. So when I am trying to teach Canadian history, my goal is to teach the truth of our history, which is that Canada has always been diverse, both in terms of Canada as the entity that we know today, but also the space that we call Canada prior to the arrival of Europeans has always been a place of many different people, many different cultures, languages, and you know, sometimes we get along, sometimes we don't get along, but we're all complicated, but we're all enmeshed together in this kind of web that makes up this country, but that also connects us to the past, the present, and the future. So when I'm teaching Canadian history, this is what I like to focus on, is that the stories that we tell ourselves about the past matter. They shape who we see ourselves as and how we relate to the rest of the world. And also that the future of our country is in our hands, and we can shape it however we want to shape it. And we can look to the past to learn, you know, what happened, did it work, did it not work, but we can change what happened and make a better future. If that doesn't sound too corny.
Oh, it sounds like 100% corny, but in like a really good way, like in a really inspiring way, because I think that's what we all kind of want from our teaching and learning history. But it seems like sometimes we can get into these rote models of just teaching those old white dudes and forgetting the fact that we can keep writing and rewriting these stories. When I talk about history, and I talk about this in the book, and I haven't done a video on it yet, but I say, like, I think that we should think more history of more as a magnetic poetry kit than
like that.
Than like a book, because with a magnetic poetry kit, like, we still have all of the words and the ideas, but we can rework them to identify particular ideas that we want to explore. And so I think that you leaving on this corny note provides a lot of like hope for what a critical and compassionate history might look like. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. I think that, you know, when we're going through stuff or times like this, hope is really important.
Yeah, and that's come up in the other videos as well. And like this notion of connection. And so it's been great to be able to do these to connect together. So thank you so much for making the time to talk, and for connecting and sharing this sense of hope with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. See you later. Bye. I remain so humbled and in awe of all of the people that have taken the time to speak to me today. That was like another great, amazing conversation. I hope you're getting as much out of it as I am. Please let me know if you want to talk. It'd be great to interview more teachers about what they are thinking about, especially now that there are so many more resources now from our provincial governments about online learning and online teaching. All right, everyone, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.